Back to Crit and Crit, everyone. I'm Scint.
I'm Axion.
And we are going to continue through our playthrough of the only tangentially related to Christmas, Pokemon Christmas, as we continue our read-through / discussion of A Christmas Carol. When last we left you, we did a fairly thorough dive into the Ghost of Christmas Past's appearance and what it meant for Scrooge and how it could be received in other ways as well, and how that could have possibly been enough on its own to impact Scrooge's change. Today, we are moving on to leave Goldenrod City as we head back to Goldenrod City just to, do the badge and stuff. And, of course, battle everything. But we are also going to move on to discuss the second of the the third of the four spirits, technically, that visited Scrooge.
The Ghost of Christmas Present. Come forth and know me better, man.
The Ghost of Christmas Present. I saved the receipt, so I'm going to take back the PlayStation that doesn't work.
Why do you have a PlayStation that doesn't work?
Because it got dropped in the middle. I don't know, it's a hypothetical situation for the sake of a joke.
I mean, that's fair. Ah, crud. I was hoping that wouldn't happen. Anyway, so Scrooge has just returned from his experience in the past, and fallen back asleep, only to wake up again, and to find himself feeling disturbed, but still alone. There's no sign of anyone else in the room.
Yeah, I do like this, though, because, well, Scrooge, as much as we've met him, Scrooge has not been a great person. We've only started to see him soften slightly as he's been confronted with ghosts and his own past and the mistakes he's made. But he doesn't want to be frightened by another ghost. So when he began to wonder which of his curtains this new spectre would draw back, he put them every one aside with his own hands, and lying down again, established a sharp lookout all around the bed. For he wished to challenge the spirit on the moment of its appearance, and did not wish to be taken by surprise and made nervous. Oh no, I've been through 2 of these already. I know what's going to happen, and you're not going to catch me by surprise. Spoilers, he is caught by surprise.
Yep. At first, nothing happens. To the point where Scrooge gets tired of waiting and goes poking around his building looking for the spirit.
And I do want to call attention to that again as well. Dickens talks about, there are lots of people, who would basically be ready for anything. Usually being equal to the time of day, express the wide range of their capacity for adventure by observing that they are good for anything from pitch and toss to manslaughter, between which opposite extremes, no doubt, therein lies a tolerably wide and comprehensive range of subjects. Without venturing for Scrooge quite as heartily as this, I don't mind calling on you to believe that he was ready for a good broad field of strange appearances, and that nothing between a baby and a rhinoceros would have astonished him very much. And there's a lot there that I love, but now, being prepared for almost anything, he was not by any means prepared for nothing. And consequently, when the bell struck 1 and no shape appeared, he was taken with a violent fit of trembling. So Scrooge has gone out of his way to get ready, and hi, Snowrut. Oh, it's our female Snowrut, too. Yay.
Yep, this is exactly what we came here for.
You're gonna critical hit it to death.
That's why I'm using Mud Slap.
Pocket Sand.
Pocket Sand.
Scrooge is so raring to go for, I'm gonna yell at this spirit, he's not gonna scare me, he's not gonna make me feel like a fool. I'm going to fight it on my own terms. I'm going to face it, and it's going to know things. Apparently what it knows is Scrooge is waiting for him, and he's not going to show up by the bed. So yeah, it's not until Scrooge actually leaves to go, looking around the house that, well, he actually sees something. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, a quarter of an hour went by, yet nothing came. All this time he lay upon his bed, the very core and center of a blaze of ruddy light which streamed upon it when the clock proclaimed the hour, and which, being only light, was more alarming than a dozen ghosts, as he was powerless to make out what it meant, or would be at, and was sometimes apprehensive that he might be at that very moment an interesting case of spontaneous combustion, without having the consolation of knowing it. He is so freaked out by the idea that he knows there's supposed to be a ghost coming, and it's not there, that seeing any light in his room, he's literally concerned he might burst into flame. It's great.
Stay in the ball.
Didn't work. No.
Don't you want to be our friend?
Maybe in the future. Yeah, we can call this one future. Then we can have all the tenses together.
That
And
was the plan.
Our party can be very tense.
Yay! Maybe it just wanted to be color coordinated.
It's kind of hard to talk about color coordination in one of the old school Pokemon games when you're working with a palette of like 3 colors. Yes, I know there are more than 3 colors. I don't care. It was a joke.
Alright. So, Scrooge...
So Scrooge gets up to leave.
Yep, and
And the moment Scrooge's hand was on the lock, a strange voice called him by his name and bade him enter. He obeyed. It was his own room, there was no doubt about that, but it had undergone a surprising transformation. The walls and ceiling were so hung with living green that it looked a perfect grove, from every part of which bright gleaming berries glistened. The crisp leaves of holly, mistletoe, and ivy reflected back the light, as if so many little mirrors had been scattered there, and such a mighty blaze went roaring up the chimney, as that dull petrifaction of a hearth had never known in Scrooge's time or Marley's, or for many and many a winter season gone. Heaped up upon the floor to form a kind of throne were turkeys, geese, game, poultry, brawn, and great joints of meat, sucking pigs, long wreaths of sausages, mince pies, plum puddings, barrels of oysters, red-hot chestnuts, cherry-cheeked apples, juicy oranges, luscious pears, immense 12 cakes, and seething bowls of punch that made the chamber dim with their delicious steam. I like the idea that they're piled up like a throne. So this isn't the Game of Thrones, this is the throne of game. All that hunted meat prepared for feast, and it's just there like a throne. In an easy state upon this couch there sat a jolly giant, glorious to see, who bore a glowing torch, in shape not unlike Plenty's horn, and held it up, high up, to shed its light on Scrooge as he came peeping round the door.
This is the Ghost of Christmas Present. And he
Yep.
is here... Well, first, kind of to once again show off Dickens' love of writing about food. I swear, the only person that I've heard of who likes writing about food as much as Charles Dickens is George R.R. Martin, and I don't really read a lot of his stuff.
Counterpoint, Brian Jakes.
That's
Name
fair.
me one Redwall book that doesn't have a whole mess of food, which is really
That's what
concerning when you consider it's been created by mice.
Yep.
And now, like, I remember how Pixar showed what happens when rats and mice decide to cook, and it didn't really end super well.
I mean, that was just one rat.
Anyone can cook, but we should probably not put that on the Michelin star guide. How would Gordon Ramsay react to this guy, you think? It's like, you've made all this food and you're lounging on it.
That's a rabbit hole. Let's not go down that.
Were there no moves that Snow White needed to learn before it became Frostlass?
Nope.
Your future evolved into Frostlass. This is what you are destined to become forever.
I am sure there are a lot of people who would be 100% okay with this.
Are you one of those people?
I wouldn't be opposed.
Okay.
Yay, ghosts. Right.
Alright, so let's talk about the ghost's appearance. And so, we did comment quite a bit on, well, the Ghost of Christmas Past appearance as the elderly child candle. Because, I mean, how else are we going to describe that? So far, we've only had the Ghost of Christmas Present described as a giant. Oh, what's it going to do? Teleport at you?
So, giant surrounded by food.
Not just surrounded by, lounging on.
Which is kind of a waste of food.
Anyway, it was clothed in one simple deep green robe or mantle bordered with white fur. This garment hung so loosely on the figure that its capacious breast was bare, as if disdaining to be warded or concealed by any artifice. Its feet, observable beneath the ample folds of the garment, were also bare, and on its head it wore no other covering than a holly wreath set here and there with shining icicles. Its dark brown curls were long and free as its genial face, its sparkling eye, its open hand, its cheery voice, its unconstrained demeanor, and its joyful air. Girded round its middle was an antique scabbard, but no sword was in it, and the ancient sheath was eaten up with rust.
So an empty scabbard rusted to uselessness.
For a Christmas present. So, probably a fairly easy leap to take there that there is no fighting on Christmas. There has not been for some time, and there should not be. Otherwise, he probably would have one, and at the very least, his scabbard would not be rusted. So, probably a pretty easy interpretation to take there, with Ghost of Christmas Present wanting to urge peace and goodwill among his fellow men, especially considering that's literally the entire focus of Scrooge's forced character development.
Yep.
Everybody wants him to stop being a jerk and start being kind to others because, look, seriously, you're making yourself as miserable as anybody else. Why don't you try and make other people happy? You'll make yourself happy too. Yay. Oh, is there not the pseudo-widow in this one?
Nope, doesn't look like it. There's instead a block of ice and a guy that tells me if I want to learn how to melt it, I need to beat Whitney.
Okay. Are you ready for the mill tank?
I am not.
I'm still not used to, like, the idea of Pokemon hacks in a way. Like, I know they've been around ever since, like, Pokemon became a thing and the internet made everything much easier to do stuff, but, like, I learned which Pokemon are in which gen, and Glaceon in the Johto sprite style is really throwing me. I should have commented on that with Frostlass. I'm commenting on it now. It's just like, it doesn't really help that I don't think Glaceon's a very good evolution anyway. Like, it's not doing anything that Vaporeon wasn't already doing. So it just feels like it was forced in for no real reason. Also, I don't understand why if they've introduced the Dawn and Dusk Stone, that Espeon and Umbreon and later generations still need to evolve by friendship when the clock tells you it's okay, instead of just using a Dawn Stone and a Dusk Stone, and why Leafeon doesn't evolve with a Leaf Stone, and this doesn't make any sense because, like, Eevee's whole purpose was look at the evolutionary stones. It can be anything if you use the right stone, and they've changed that six or seven different ways thanks to Leafeon, Glaceon, Espeon, Umbreon, and Sylveon. Like, why? Why establish the rules if you're... I'm good.
Would you like to go back to talking about Dickens now?
What the Dickens are you worried about?
Oh dear. Right, so... Ghost of Christmas Present.
Yes. You have never seen the like of me before, exclaimed the spirit. Never, Scrooge made answer to it. Have never walked forth with the younger brothers of my family, meaning, for I am very young, my elder brothers born in these later years, pursued the Phantom. So I find that interesting because I think that's meant to imply that the Ghost of Christmas Present is specifically only around for that one Christmas present. It's not the same ghost every year. It's a different Ghost of Christmas Present.
Well, something happens later that basically 100% confirms that.
What's that?
At the end of the chapter, the Ghost of Christmas Present dies. He grows old through the course of the chapter, and at the end of the chapter, he dies. And fades away.
See, I didn't realize it had died there, because what I remember was looked out for the ghost and saw it not. Just as the bell struck 12, which is basically what happened with Christmas Past. Like, when his time was up, he just yeeted on out. I didn't realize I kind of missed him aging and growing old.
Yep.
I remembered the children being there.
It talks through the story about how Scrooge notes that his appearance is changing slightly here and there.
There it is. There it is, yes. While Scrooge remained unaltered in his outward form, the ghost grew older, clearly older. Scrooge had observed this change but never spoke of it until they left the children's 12th night party. When looking at the spirit as they stood together in an open place, he noticed that its hair was gray. Our spirit's lives so short. My life upon this globe is very brief. It ends tonight. So, yep, you're right. I missed that because I was kind of focused on the other stuff in the chapter. Which is why it's good to go back and reread and have these discussions, because there's a lot of really, really densely packed information in a story as short as this. Like, Christmas Carol is, in the copy I have, under 70 pages long. You can easily read this in like an hour or two if you set aside the time. It is not a long read. And it's really kind of impressive how much of an impact this story, short as it is, has had on popular culture with so little space actually taken up and so much dense information packed in.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's my bad for missing it, and thank you for correcting me.
You're welcome.
Yeah. Have you had many brothers, Spirit? More than 1,800. A tremendous family to provide for, which is, slightly insensitive given how the chapter ends. Hey-o, Scrooge. Spirit, conduct me where you will. I went forth last night on compulsion, and I learned a lesson which is working now. Tonight, if you have aught to teach me, let me profit by it. Touch my robe. And maybe I am not a good person here, but you guys remember, like, a few years ago, there was that meme about, like, take my hand, adventure, and then you just shoot off into the sky with rainbows? That's kind of what I picture with Scrooge and the Ghost of Christmas Present.
I mean,
Except,
kind of
instead of rainbows, it's like snowflakes and Christmas hams and puddings.
I mean, it is kind of the same idea. It's just, hang on, we're going for a ride.
Touch my robe. Gluttony!
Except it's not gluttony, it's...
What would you call lounging on a chaise longue made of sausage and plums?
I mean, fair, but the Spirit has no intent of eating it all himself. It is very much symbolizing the idea of sharing the bounty of the world with everyone on this particular day of celebration.
The Great Spirit Bake-Off.
Alright, we need a name for a Vaporeon, because that's what this Eevee's gonna become.
Well, what's a character we haven't used? We've got Cratchit, we've got Tiny Tim, we've got Freddy.
Let's go with Freddy. Vaporeon's not particularly tiny.
This is the second thing in a row we've read with a Freddy. What are we doing next, Scooby-Doo? Never
no,
mind,
but
we'll
there is
it
a
out.
Fred in our next story.
Oh, right. Well, okay. Speculation run rampant, everyone. Have fun. Speaking of having fun, let's go see how Scrooge is going to enjoy this Christmas present when he hasn't actually celebrated Christmas in several years.
So, Scrooge's first destination on his celebration, quote-unquote, of the Christmas holiday is the Cratchit house. I almost said Pratchett. We will
Tell me again how the little horse-shaped ones move. That's more Christmas future, anyway. But before we get there, there's a lot of really in-depth description of just what they see on the way to the Cratchits. They're flying over the marketplace, and there's people shoveling away on the housetops, and yelling and calling out to each other, throwing snowballs, getting food, making food, running to see people. It's just... Dickens really, really wants to emphasize the inherent joy of the holiday, which obviously is going to be done as a counterpart to Scrooge being Scrooge.
Mm-hmm.
Because, well, Scrooge makes his living out of being a miserable old bag.
Yep.
So, well, that's kind of the purpose that's meant to be changed by this. So, of course, we're going to have him compare to everyone. We want him to see how happy everyone is. We want him to see how even though these people don't have as much money as he does, they're still able to be happy together. They're still able to find joy in life. Which, as he learned when revisiting his conversation with Belle last chapter, he went off the deep end with it. It's pretty heavily implied he started saving to try and make a comfortable living for himself and Belle, but just went way too overboard with it to the exclusion of actually maintaining the relationship with the woman he had thrown everything away for.
Yep.
And so Scrooge gets to see that, look at all these people. But soon the steeples called good people all to church and chapel, and away they came, flocking through the streets in their best clothes with their gayest faces, and at the same time there emerged from scores of by-streets, lanes, and nameless turnings innumerable people carrying their dinners to the bakers' shops. The sight of these poor revelers appeared to interest the Spirit very much, for he stood with Scrooge beside him in a baker's doorway, and taking off the covers as their bearers passed, sprinkled incense on their dinners from his torch. And it was a very uncommon kind of torch, for once or twice when there were angry words between some dinner carriers who had jostled with each other, he shed a few drops of water on them from it, and their good humour was restored directly. For they said it was a shame to quarrel upon Christmas Day, and so it was, God love it, so it was. Ghost of Christmas Present is here just to make sure Christmas stays Christmas. That people aren't fighting, that people aren't tearing each other apart, that people aren't using the holiday to make each other's lives miserable. Christmas, to Dickens, is a time for brotherhood, togetherness, kindness. And the ghost of Christmas Present really, really, really exists to make that happen. And I think it's good that Scrooge gets to see this. Because, well, it's really hard to say how much character development he can get from any one thing. I don't know if he would have had as much development without all three spirits, but I think Christmas Present is going to be particularly enlightening for him.
Yep.
As we arrive at the Cratchits.
So, as we are quite aware, Bob Cratchit is not well off. He is very poorly paid by Scrooge. He is very underkempt for the weather at the time. He doesn't have a proper coat. He's keeping himself warm in the office with a house coat. He's relying on a single coal to keep himself warm in the office. And he is working for the most miserly man in town. Yet, he is depicted as nothing but cheerful during this entire celebration of the holiday with his family, with his very doting wife, his handful of children, and his most youngest child, Tiny Tim.
Alright, so actually I want to look at this. This is something I had to do quite a lot with my classes, is break out the inflation calculator. Because Scrooge calls special attention to Bob's salary. Bob Cratchit's dwelling with the spirit stopped to bless Bob Cratchit's dwelling with the sprinklings of his torch. Think of that. Bob had 15 bob a week himself. He pocketed on Saturdays but 15 copies of his Christian name, and yet the ghost of Christmas Present blessed his 4-room house. So, today's money, £15 would be about $20 US. So, $20 a week. Adjusting for inflation, 1843 would be about $560 today. So, Bob, for his family, which, I need to get, I think I have a count of this. He has a wife and 4 kids, one of whom has quite possibly a terminal illness. We'll talk about Tiny Tim more later. He makes about $560 a week to support a family of 6, including one special needs child.
Mm-hmm.
So, let's multiply that for the full month. So, about $2,200 a month, possibly $2,300. I'm rounding roughly because I'm not a math person. So, that's not a lot for a family that large.
Yeah. I mean, I've been in situations where that's how much I was making, or a little more, a little less, and I was still barely able to make rent, and I don't have kids. And I usually had a roommate at the time.
Yep, so, I mean, obviously things would be different back then, purchasing power and prices would have changed, but it's just kind of interesting to me that, like, it's not always given a lot of attention when people do, looks at classic novels like this, that, they really take into account the changing inflation, especially when, in a lot of books, the money itself is rather important. Like, even if it's not really important in terms of, like, a plot point, it's important for a sense of scale.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Huck Finn, we've mentioned before with this book, is another example of that, because, like, in the first paragraph, we find out that Huck Finn, a 13 to 14-year-old child, has $6,000. The kids are impressed because, hey, that's a lot of money. But when you adjust for inflation and tell them that this kid has almost $200,000 to his name, they pay a lot more attention. Because they now have a better sense of scale for just how much money is being thrown around to these things, how much money is being made, how much people are being deprived of, how much is actually being given to people, etc., etc., etc. And in a story like this, where the focus is on generosity, rich and poor, and etc., etc., I think that needs to be looked at a little more to really understand how Bob is making things work and why things are possibly tighter than they could be. But down a rabbit hole. The Cratchit household is very, very happy with their small family, well, large family, but small means. And it's special attention is actually drawn to, like, the food they have, and the pudding being very small, but not a single Cratchit would have commented on that. It would have been flat heresy to do so. Any Cratchit would have blushed to hint at such a thing. They know they're poor, but they're still with each other, and that matters more. They're far, far happier on Christmas with each other, and they're basically nothing, than Scrooge is alone in his house with his mountains of gold.
Yep. Scrooge seems to take a particular interest during this time in Tiny Tim. And I think it's time to get into his situation. You looked up some of the details of the symptoms that Tiny Tim is displaying.
Yeah, apparently there's been a lot of people who have dug into specifically which vague but sympathetic Victorian disease have they given our child character in this version. It's usually consumption in many books because, like, consumption, aka, tuberculosis, makes you pale and just look interesting, as I remember being put in Anne of Green Gables. It leaves you a very handsome corpse. What?
Just the way that was worded was like, that's unnerving.
Hey, you want to get instant sympathy, you make a sick Victorian child.
I guess
it's like the Newbery Medal of the 1800s. So, the general consensus I've seen from the Googling I've done has been rickets.
And Scrooge seems to be sympathetic to Tiny Tim in a way that we haven't seen from him in almost anyone that he's encountered, except for one person. His sister.
His sister. Yep.
And I think this is why Tiny Tim has such a strong effect on Scrooge, because he sees an echo of his sister and her frailty, for lack of a better word, in Tiny Tim.
I could definitely see that, because it's really like seeing Fanny actually does a lot to have somebody run onto the gym and smack right into you. Seeing Fanny in his past memories and having that brought up really does seem to be the start of when he starts to thaw, because like Scrooge is pretty upset to see how alone he is at school, and then Fanny shows up and he just lights up. So you really get the impression that Scrooge was very close with his sister, and I do maintain the idea that his difficulties with his nephew are largely tied to, like, possibly lingering guilt about his sister being gone, possibly being his fault or not, but being the Victorian era and medicine being what it was. I'm pretty sure she probably died in childbirth, especially since she's repeatedly described as being frail enough that a breeze could knock over. And, we don't trust Victorian doctors for a very good reason.
Well, even if it wasn't that she died in childbirth, it might well be she died of something that his wealth could have treated. And he chose for some reason not to intervene, or he wasn't there to know about it until it was too late. Whatever the reason, he clearly has some personal guilt or sorrow about it that he holds, and it kind of morphs into resentment in the case of Fred, which does a bit lean more towards the died in childbirth, because you kind of get the impression of, this is your fault, you killed her, that you see in some other stories where you have one adult, it's usually the father, or in this case like an uncle, being irritated at the child of a female relation who died in childbirth.
No, I'm not really sure I read so much resentment into his behavior around Freddy as I do just exasperation. Like, he doesn't seem to actively hate Freddy, he just doesn't bother with him, which, as far as... Well, your past is gone. As far as this sort of thing goes, isn't really much better in a lot of ways. It's still kind of like, hey, we're like all each other has, yeah, I have to go balance my checkbook, bye. So, but it's not like, he doesn't seem to be actively hateful of Freddy. It mostly just seems like, oh, this again, no, I have never said yes to Christmas. Why would I want to come to Christmas this year? Why would I want to put myself through this? You know? Like, it seems like he's just more irritated that Freddy keeps bothering him when he'd rather just avoid people in general.
Right.
So, I don't know.
It's definitely not nearly as bad as you'd see in other stories, where this sort of thing is definitely a case of resentment of, like I said, usually the father over the death of the mother in childbirth, and blaming the child for it.
But I mean, like, if we really wanted to talk about Victorian medicine, there's a lot of really interesting Victorian medicine out there.
Yeah.
What's the meme going around? You seems like you're having feelings. Why don't you go do cocaine about it?
I have not seen that one recently, but I...
No, sorry, it's ghosts in your blood. Because, you know, this is also the era in which we're only starting to think that maybe washing hands might be a good thing. Sewers that aren't on top of the streets are starting to become a thing in London, because this is around the time of, like, the Broad Street pump and the cholera outbreak, and leading to the sanitary movement and everything with that. And it's just like... Remember, they still think breathing the bad air, the miasma theory, is more viable than germs in a lot of cases.
Right.
Which,
Anyway, we've gotten way off track. And we do have
You're new to literary analysis, aren't you? This is how literary analysis goes.
No, it's fair. I was more saying that this was going to be a good segue to moving over to the next part of Ghost Christmas Present's trip, which is where he takes Scrooge to go see Freddy's party.
I wasn't done talking about the Cratchits yet. We hadn't even finished on Tiny Tim. But,
right, well,
I mean...
Yeah, let's finish this, then we'll move on. Sorry,
right.
I thought you were done.
Oh no, I just got lost in a rabbit hole. But, it's curious to me that Scrooge is interested in Tiny Tim now. Because, like, we don't really have a clear indication of how long Bob Cratchit has worked for Scrooge. But, like, we don't really have an indication that he's a new employee. So... Scrooge has presumably worked with Bob Cratchit for quite some time. He knows Bob is poor, he knows Bob has a family. Has Bob never mentioned Tiny Tim to him? Or, probably more likely, Scrooge doesn't really give the opportunity to, or Scrooge didn't remember until he got smacked in the face with, "Look at this sad child limping around the house, pity pity."
If Scrooge is anything like certain employers from the modern day, he probably thought that Cratchit was lying to get sympathy and or extra money out of him. Because I know there's a lot of jobs I've worked at where if somebody was sick or had to call out for some reason with family issues, there was a lot of suspicion among the bosses that they were lying about it to get out of work. And Scrooge strikes me as the suspicious, untrusting sort who would immediately ascribe the worst possible motivation to anything and do so in such a way that it's designed, that he's interpreting it as clearly designed to inhibit him and his ability to do his work and make his money in some way. And again, that's presuming that he even ever noticed Cratchit bring it up at all.
But yeah, like, I do like the idea that Scrooge latches on to Tiny Tim because he reminds him of his frail sister. I also had interesting that, like, general consensus, as I mentioned, seems to be that Tiny Tim might have had rickets, which is something that is treatable through proper nutrition and getting the right vitamins. So, like, it's kind of like pellagra as well, one of those vitamin deficiency diseases that really only pops up among the lower classes and those who can't afford a well-balanced nutritional diet, which is actually why so many breakfast cereals these days now include niacin in them because of a bad pellagra outbreak in the U.S. South.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is absolutely a case where Scrooge does have the power to help Tiny Tim, because all he has to do is give Bob a slight raise to afford actual nutritious food for his ailing son. Scrooge can fix this.
Mm-hmm.
But, and the spirit does actually mention, because Scrooge asks, like, is he going to be okay? And the spirit does outright say, No, he's not going to be okay.
If nothing changes.
Yes. Yeah, I see a vacant seat in the poor chimney corner and a crutch without an owner carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, none other of my race will find him here. So, yeah, if something is not done, he's not going to see another Christmas.
Yes, not only is he going to die, he's going to die within the next year.
And then just to really rub this in, because this is the whole purpose of having the ghosts, what then? If he be like to die, he had better do it, and decrease the surplus population.
Yep, direct quote. And it smacks Scrooge in the face like getting run over by a carriage.
Which Dickens actually just does straight up say, yes, he used his word against you. Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted by the spirit, and was overcome with penitence and grief. And the spirit doubles down. Man, if man you be in heart not adamant, forbear that wicked cant until you have discovered what the surplus is and where it is. Will you decide what men shall live, what men shall die? It may be that in the sight of heaven, you are more worthless and less fit to live than millions like this poor man's child. Oh God, to hear the insect on the leaf pronouncing on the too much life among his hungry brothers in the dust. And let's be real, who would have actually been able to tell Scrooge that, besides a supernatural visitor who doesn't have anything to fear from this man? Scrooge has probably never been so directly confronted by this before.
Yep.
Which is why these spirits have been so useful to him, and he's already making progress in terms of, having a heart. But, it's also interesting that, Bob even doesn't seem to hold resentment for Scrooge. He even offers a toast. Mr. Scrooge, said Bob, I'll give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of the feast. The rest of his family objects.
Yes, but say which his family does not approve of.
Yeah. I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I hope he'd have good appetite for it. My dear, the children, Christmas Day. It should be Christmas Day, I am sure, on which one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you do, poor fellow. My dear, Christmas Day. I'll drink his health for your sake and the day's, not for his. Long life to him, and a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. He'll be very merry and very happy, I have no doubt. Scrooge was the ogre of the family. The mention of his name cast a dark shadow on the party, which was not dispelled for 5 full minutes. Gotta be fun to, spiritually eavesdrop on a family like that and see that when someone tries to bring you up in a positive way, everyone else is like, are you serious right now?
Well, this is a new tactic.
Yep.
I don't remember Miltank knowing Bide before, but...
Good thing it didn't work.
Yeah, I think it missed because of the mud slap.
Yeah, good thing for that, huh?
And I'm wearing a bright powder.
But yeah, that's gonna have a huge effect on Scrooge. After getting his heart mostly stomped on because of the whole Tiny Tim situation and the whole, you have...
Speaking of stomping.
Yeah, and, the guilt trip with that, and the fact that, dude, you can't just say things like you've been saying about people and not deal with some sort of consequence for it. Getting that rubbed in his face, and then seeing how all of the Cratchits go through the rest of their day after he basically becomes the rain cloud on them. But yeah, they play games, his children are, Cratchit's children talk about work, and, one of them being a man of business, a couple of, his daughter and son are talking about apprenticeships and the kind of work they have to do. So basically, the entire family has to work to get by, which we've talked about more with this sort of era and gender expectations with My Fair Lady, how, Eliza, in her situation, well, Marley is dead. There was no doubt about that.
Anyway.
Yeah. So they've mentioned it's they were not a handsome family. They were not well dressed. Their shoes were far from being waterproof. Their clothes were scanty, and Peter might have known, and very likely did, the inside of the pawnbrokers. But they were happy, grateful, pleased with one another, and contented with the time, and when they faded, and looked happier yet in the bright sprinklings of the spirit's torch at parting, Scrooge had his eye upon them, and especially on Tiny Tim, until the last.
And this has run quite long, so we will continue the discussion of the Ghost of Christmas Present next time. Thank you, and we will continue next episode. Bye!
Bye!